The definition dilemma. The Galactic Peacekeeping Ethics Council headquarters resembled what might happen if you combined a courthouse, a library, and a meditation center, then stretched it across the event horizon of good taste. The architecture managed to be both imposingly sterile and vaguely threatening, which was fitting, given that its purpose was to regulate violence across 27 species and over 4,000 inhabited worlds. High Arbiter Zolonia Tuvex, a Calidraxian with skin the color of polished amethyst and 6 articulated limbs that moved with deliberate precision, glided through the main hall toward the emergency session chamber. The silvery robes of her office trailed behind her like liquid mercury. Her expression, normally a careful mask of impartiality, now displayed a rare emotion that her staff had come to recognize: existential dread. "They've done it again," she muttered to her assistant, a spindly Telgian named Rilk who struggled to keep pace. "The humans have found another loophole." "I've reviewed the preliminary report, High Arbiter," Rilk replied, his voice a nervous whistle through mandibles. "Technically speaking, they haven't violated any specific regulation." "That's exactly the problem." Zolonia stopped abruptly, causing Rilk to nearly collide with her. "Our regulations are 15,927 pages long, with 342 appendices covering every conceivable aspect of ethical combat. We spent 3 centuries perfecting them before humans even achieved interstellar travel. Perhaps we should have waited another century," Rilk offered unhelpfully. The emergency chamber was already filled with representatives from the Council's various divisions. The tension in the room was palpable. Several species whose biology allowed for visible stress responses were displaying them in abundance. A Morrigan delegate's feathers were standing on end, while a pair of Zithrak analysts had turned the pale green color their species displayed during intense cognitive distress. "Let's begin," Zolonia announced, taking her position at the center of the circular chamber. "Dr. Krell, please present the findings from the Orion incident." Dr. Krell, a Vexer with translucent skin through which one could see his 3 hearts beating at different rates, activated the holographic display. The human peacekeeping force was dispatched to address a hostage situation on Orion Station. A group of torrid extremists had taken control of the station's environmental systems and threatened to vent atmosphere if their demands weren't met. Standard procedure would dictate negotiation followed by targeted neurological suppressors, commented Sub-Arbiter Morax, a hulking Drinian whose species was known for their methodical approach to everything. "The humans chose an alternative approach," Dr. Krell continued, his middle heart visibly accelerating. "They requested permission to use what they termed standard non-lethal crowd control materials. Permission was granted based on their assurance of compliance with Section 47.3 regarding preservation of life and minimization of permanent harm." The display showed footage from the station's security system. Several humans in standard peacekeeping uniforms were visible, but instead of carrying regulation neural disruptors, they appeared to be transporting ordinary maintenance supplies. "What are we looking at?" asked Zolonia, narrowing her 6 eyes. "That's standard cleaning solvent, cooking oil, and—" Dr. Krell paused, consulting his notes, "something called glitter." A murmur ran through the chamber. The humans proceeded to create what they termed a tactical environment modification by combining these materials in specific locations throughout the station's ventilation system. The footage continued, showing the torrid extremists suddenly slipping and falling as the floors became unexpectedly frictionless. Simultaneously, the ventilation system released clouds of reflective particles that adhered to everything they touched, including the extremists' visual organs. The combination created a scene of complete chaos, with the heavily armed torrids rendered effectively helpless within minutes. The humans then entered wearing specialized footwear that maintained traction and filtered respirators to protect against the particles. They apprehended all 17 extremists without firing a single shot. Silence fell over the chamber. "And the hostages?" Zolonia finally asked. "All safe. There were no fatalities. 7 extremists suffered minor contusions from falls, and one experienced temporary respiratory distress, all fully recovered within hours. So they turned an entire space station into what amounts to a giant pratfall trap. Summarize Sub-Arbiter Morax, his tone somewhere between horror and admiration. Precisely, confirmed Dr. Krell. And there is absolutely nothing in our regulations that specifically prohibits it. Zalonia massaged her temple ridges, a gesture she had unconsciously adopted from her human counterparts. This is the 14th incident in the past solar cycle. Each time, they use materials and methods that no species would consider appropriate for combat scenarios, yet technically remain within our ethical boundaries. The human representative is waiting to address the council, Rilke reminded her quietly. Send them in, Zalonia sighed. Perhaps they can explain how this possibly qualifies as standard procedure. The chamber doors parted to admit Ambassador Chen, the human liaison to the council. She was a slight woman with a disarming smile that somehow never reached her eyes that contained what Zalonia had come to recognize as a distinctly human quality. The gleam of someone perpetually calculating angles others hadn't considered. High Arbiter, esteemed council members, Chen bowed respectfully. I understand there are concerns about our recent peacekeeping operation. Concerns is an understatement, Ambassador. Zalonia replied. Your peacekeepers turned a space station into a giant trap using cleaning supplies. Yes, Chen nodded, as if this were perfectly reasonable. Non-toxic, non-permanent, and highly effective. 0 fatalities. That's not the point. Dr. Krell's middle heart was now beating so rapidly it blurred. Combat scenarios should follow predictable, regulated protocols. Your species consistently employs methods that no rational being would consider appropriate. Chen's expression remained pleasant, but her posture shifted subtly. With respect, Dr. Krell, effectiveness and preservation of life are our primary concerns. Your regulations specify outcomes, not methods. We consistently meet or exceed the required safety parameters. By throwing glitter at terrorists, Sub-Arbiter Morax rumbled incredulously. Industrial-grade reflective microparticles, Chen corrected smoothly. Biodegradable and non-toxic, I might add. Zalonia leaned forward. Ambassador, surely you understand our concern. Last month, your peacekeepers disabled a pirate fleet using nothing but precisely timed sonic pulses that apparently recreated something called dubstep. The Brown Note incident, Chen nodded. Another non-lethal success story. The pirates surrendered within 20 minutes. After experiencing collective gastrointestinal distress, Zalonia countered, which is explicitly permitted under Section 62.7 regarding temporary physiological disruption without permanent harm. Chen replied, her smile never wavering. The council members exchanged glances. She was right, of course. Their regulations focused on outcomes, minimizing death and permanent injury, rather than prescribing specific methods. It had never occurred to the Council's founders that any species would approach combat in such a bewilderingly unpredictable manner. There's also the matter of psychological impact, Dr. Krell added. The torrid extremists have requested specialized counseling. One reportedly keeps repeating, the sparkles are everywhere. Temporary psychological discomfort is permitted under Section 83.2. Yes, we know, Zalonia interrupted. Ambassador, the issue isn't that you're breaking our rules. It's that you're following them in ways that make us question the very foundations of combat ethics. Your species seems to view our carefully crafted regulations as a creative challenge rather than a binding framework. For the first time, Shen's diplomatic mask slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been pride. High Arbiter, humans have a long history of adapting to constraints. When conventional weapons are unavailable or inappropriate, we improvise. Our methods may seem unorthodox, but they achieve your stated goals, minimizing harm while effectively neutralizing threats, and causing existential crises among our ethics analysts, muttered Rilke, who was immediately silenced by Zalonia's glare. The Council will need to deliberate on this matter, Zalonia announced. We may need to consider amendments to our regulations to address unconventional methodologies. Chen bowed again. Of course, High Arbiter. Though I would gently suggest that restricting effective non-lethal approaches might push peacekeepers toward more conventional and potentially more harmful tactics. As the ambassador departed, Zolonia couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that they had just been subtly threatened with compliance through the promise of reasonableness. Should we begin drafting amendments to address the human approaches? Asked Rilke. Zolonia stared at the frozen image on the display, a torrid extremist covered in glitter, slipping on an oiled surface, his expression one of complete bewilderment. I fear we would only inspire them to greater creativity, she replied quietly. Schedule a full council session. We need to reconsider our fundamental approach to combat ethics in a universe that includes humans. As the chamber emptied, Dr. Krell approached her, his heart's finally beating in unison again. There's one more thing, High Arbiter. We've received a distress call from the Proxima sector. The situation appears volatile, and standard peacekeeping approaches have been deemed insufficient. Let me guess, Zolonia said, already knowing the answer. They're requesting human intervention. Dr. Krell nodded grimly. Several species specifically asked for them. It seems the effectiveness of their methods has not gone unnoticed. Zolonia closed her eyes briefly. May the cosmos help us all, especially whoever they're being sent to pacify. The demonstration. The situation in the Proxima sector had deteriorated beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as a territorial dispute between the Vexari Consortium and Drell Imperium had escalated when a third party, mercenaries from the lawless Outer Rim, seized control of Nexus Station, the sector's primary transportation hub. Nexus Station itself was a marvel of engineering. A massive spinning wheel in space, home to over 40,000 civilians of various species, and the crucial junction point for 7 major trade routes. In the wrong hands, it represented both a humanitarian crisis and a strategic nightmare. In the Council's secure briefing chamber, High Arbiter Zolonia reviewed the tactical assessment with growing concern. 3 conventional peacekeeping attempts had already failed, resulting in the loss of 2 ships and several elite operatives. The mercenaries have fortified their position, reported Security Chief Forn, a grizzled Talaxian with scarred chitin and missing sensory appendages. They've rigged the station's reactor to detonate if anyone breaches their defensive perimeter. Standard neural disruptors are ineffective due to shielding technology they've acquired from somewhere beyond Council space. How many civilians remain on board? Zolonia asked. At least 30,000. Evacuation was only partially successful before they locked down all docking bays. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Thousands of lives at risk, and conventional options exhausted. The Human Peacekeeping Division has submitted a proposal, Rilke stated quietly, sliding a data crystal across the table. Zolonia didn't immediately reach for it. After our last discussion about their methods, I'm almost afraid to ask. They're calling it Operation Household. Rilke's mandibles twitched in what might have been nervousness. They're requesting authorization to use common domestic items found on any standard space habitat. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Do we have any other options? Asked Sub-Arbiter Morax. Security Chief Forn's answer was blunt. No. Conventional forces would trigger the reactor failsafe. Chemical or biological agents would endanger the civilians. Negotiation has failed repeatedly. With visible reluctance, Zolonia activated the crystal. A holographic display flickered to life, showing what appeared to be a shopping list. What am I looking at? She asked. Their requisition for the operation, Rilke explained. They're asking for large quantities of various cooking ingredients, cleaning supplies, entertainment electronics, and, he hesitated, several items whose purpose I cannot determine. Industrial quantities of petroleum jelly. Zolonia read incredulously. 20,000 ball bearings. Sound system capable of reproducing frequencies between 5 to 25,000 Hz. This isn't a tactical plan. It's madness. Ambassador Chen chose that moment to enter the chamber, accompanied by Captain Rice, the commander of the Human Peacekeeping Division. Rice was a compact, solid-looking human with close-cropped hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen enough chaos to no longer be surprised by it. High Arbiter, Chen bowed. Captain Rice has personally developed this extraction plan and will be leading the operation. Silonia gestured to the displayed list. Captain, with all due respect, this appears to be a list of random items rather than a coherent strategy. Rice stepped forward. I understand your concern, High Arbiter, if you'll permit me to explain the approach. At Silonia's nod, Rice activated a separate holographic display showing Nexus Station's schematics. The mercenaries are well-equipped and expecting a conventional assault, he began. Their defensive positions are here, here, and here. Red dots appeared throughout the station. They've rigged the reactor with a deadman switch and have hostages strategically placed to prevent targeted strikes. We're aware of these obstacles, Morax rumbled impatiently. The key to our approach is that they're expecting a fight. Rice continued, unperturbed. We're not going to give them one. Instead, we're going to change the environment itself. Over the next 20 minutes, Rice outlined a plan so unorthodox that several council members requested clarification multiple times. By the end, the chamber was filled with a mixture of disbelief, horror, and reluctant admiration. This is your plan? Silonia finally asked. To essentially turn the entire station into an elaborate series of non-lethal traps using everyday items. Precisely. Rice nodded. Each element targets a specific vulnerability while remaining within the bounds of your ethical combat regulations. No permanent harm, minimal risk to civilians, and a high probability of success. It sounds like something from a comedic entertainment program, muttered Dr. Krell. History is full of examples where humor and combat effectiveness overlap, Rice replied seriously. Laughter and terror activate similar neurological responses. We're simply exploiting that connection. After hours of debate, with the situation on Nexus Station growing more desperate by the moment, the Council finally granted authorization, with extensive documentation that this did not constitute a new standard for peacekeeping operations. 12 hours later, the Council chamber was silent as they watched the live feed from Nexus Station. The human peacekeeping team had somehow managed to infiltrate the station's maintenance systems without triggering any alarms. Now the operation was underway. It began with the station's environmental controls. Certain sections suddenly became uncomfortably warm, while others dropped to near freezing. The mercenaries, confused by the malfunction, sent teams to investigate. Teams that found themselves navigating corridors where the artificial gravity fluctuated unexpectedly or disappeared entirely. They're hurting them. Security Chief Foreign observed with professional appreciation, manipulating movement patterns through environmental changes. Next came the assault on the senses. The station's announcement system began broadcasting a carefully calculated mixture of sounds, some at frequencies that caused physical discomfort to specific species, others creating disorienting echo patterns that made it impossible to determine the direction of potential threats. The mercenaries' communication systems were flooded with conflicting information, courtesy of a signal intrusion method that Captain Rice had described as basically a sophisticated version of prank calling. Their attempts to coordinate a response were hampered by growing confusion about which threats were real and which were fabricated. Then came the physical obstacles. Corridors leading to critical areas were suddenly covered in a mixture that Rice had described as non-toxic, environmentally friendly, and approximately 3 times more slippery than ice. Security cameras showed hardened mercenaries sliding helplessly into walls, unable to maintain combat effectiveness, while struggling simply to remain upright. They're accessing the ventilation system now, Rilke reported, consulting a secondary display. The station's air soon carried a mixture of compounds, all carefully calculated to remain below toxic thresholds, but combined to create effects ranging from uncontrollable sneezing to intense drowsiness. Different mixtures were deployed in different sections, creating a constantly shifting threat that the mercenaries couldn't adapt to. This is simultaneously the most ridiculous and most effective peacekeeping operation I've ever witnessed, admitted Sub-Arbiter Morax, watching as a group of mercenaries attempting to establish a defensive position suddenly found themselves engulfed in a cloud of persistent, clingy foam that hardened on contact with their armor, effectively immobilizing them without causing injury. By the third hour, the mercenaries' command structure had collapsed entirely. Their communications revealed growing panic, not fear of death, but a more primal confusion as their environment itself seemed to turn against them in ways they couldn't predict or counter. "They're surrendering," announced Security Chief Forn, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. "All of them. They're requesting immediate extraction from the station." The final tally defied belief. All 126 mercenaries captured, 0 fatalities, minimal injuries, and not a single conventional weapon discharged by the human peacekeeping team. The reactor had been secured before the mercenaries even realized their deadman switch had been quietly neutralized, replaced with a replica that appeared functional but was actually connected to nothing. In the aftermath, as the council chambers emptied and the crisis reports were filed, Zolonia found herself alone with Ambassador Chen and Captain Reyes. "I still don't understand how this is your standard approach to combat," she admitted. "Your species has developed advanced weapons. You understand conventional tactics, yet you consistently choose methods that other species find bewildering." Reyes considered this for a moment before responding. "High Arbiter, humans have a long history of fighting both with and without advanced technology. We've learned that creativity often trumps firepower, especially when minimizing casualties is a priority. But turning an entire space station into what amounts to an elaborate practical joke," Zolonia pressed, "is it any less dignified than traditional combat?" Chen countered. "The outcome is what matters. The mercenaries are captured, the civilians are safe, and the station remains intact. The fact that the method involved cooking oil rather than plasma rifles seems a secondary consideration." Zolonia found she had no immediate response to this. After a moment, she simply asked, "Will you submit a full report on your methodology for the Council archives?" "Of course," Reyes nodded. "Though I should warn you, our approach is constantly evolving. By the time you've analyzed this operation, we'll likely have developed new methods." As they departed, Zolonia turned to Rilke, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "Update the ethics guidelines," she instructed wearily. "Add an appendix specifically addressing unconventional environmental manipulation in combat scenarios." "Should I include specific prohibitions against particular substances or methods?" Rilke asked. Zolonia considered this for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I've come to believe that would simply inspire them to greater creativity. Instead, focus on outcomes and proportionality. The humans have shown us that our fixation on method rather than result may be misguided. A philosophical shift in our approach to combat ethics," Rilke observed. "After 3 centuries of standardization." "Yes," Zolonia agreed, watching the final images from Nexus Station, mercenaries being led away, covered in a mixture of foam, glitter, and what appeared to be food coloring, looking not injured but profoundly confused. "Perhaps the humans have something to teach us after all. Combat need not be lethal to be effective. It merely needs to be unpredictable enough to overcome resistance. And the humans excel at unpredictability," Rilke added. "Indeed." Zolonia sighed. "May the cosmos help us if they ever decide to stop following our regulations entirely. Their version of lethal likely defies imagination." As the displays finally darkened, a new understanding settled over the council. The galaxy had fundamentally changed with humanity's arrival, and the definition of combat itself would never be quite the same again.